The Butterfly Tree is finally in cinemas after debuting at this year's Melbourne International Film Festival. I spoke to the movie's writer and director, Priscilla Cameron, about the process of bringing the script to life, assembling a stellar cast, and filming on Mount Tamborine. Priscilla, thanks for joining us on SWITCHCast.
Thanks, Jake.
So the cast, Melissa George, Ed Oxenbould, Ewan Leslie, and Sophie Lowe, are pretty amazing in this movie. How did you manage to get these actors together?
I think they responded to what was on the page in the script. And the script was written with a very sort of specific visual aesthetic which supported that magical realism aesthetic that exists in the film. And I think that plus the character interactions and that the characters were, they often had something else going on rather than just being one-dimensional or two-dimensional. They had past lives and they had quite in-depth backstories if you wanted to really look into that, which, I think is always sort of exciting for an actor. And I think it was probably that the screenplay had a unique edge that attracted them to the film. It wasn't my runs on the board as a director, that's for sure, as I was a first-time feature director. So it was the script itself that I think they all responded to. I met with all of them. I did audition Ed. Melissa committed very early on in the piece, I think 3 to 5 years before we went into production. And I think she just embraced the character of Evelyn and must have fallen in love with her or seen herself very much wanting to fulfill that role. So she was committed for a long time and stayed committed, which is kind of an amazing thing within itself. And then Ewan, I saw in some short films, and he was recommended to me by a friend, and I watched him in a couple of short films, and I had this moment where, oh my God, he is Al, he's the character. And Ed came in as part of the auditioning process, and with the first 10 minutes of him walking into the room, I knew he was Finn. So I was fairly confident, and you just know when an actor embodies the character. And then it was a case of having to coordinate all their schedules and hoping that we could align their dates to make it all work, which is probably the most nerve-wracking thing about casting them, actually.
Just regarding the script itself, you started writing it around 2010. Between then and the time of The Butterfly Tree's release, how much did the script change?
It changed quite considerably. I mean, interestingly, an early draft of this script won the AWG Monty Miller Award quite a few years before it was actually made. And it was very different in terms of it had a lot more insect fantasies in it, and it was kind of very loose in terms of a 3-act structure and having a very tight arc for the characters. I sort of approached it early on as just an exploration of those characters and Finn's insect fantasies, and it took me a long time to kind of realise why my subconscious kept kind of wanting to write in these insect fantasies. And I think I had about 4 or 5 different insect fantasies with different insects in the original pass. And they're a lot more subversive than what is going on in the actual finished film. And I think a lot of that got stripped out. First of all, I think it was probably a bit too subversive for financiers. And second of all, you kind of end up having to operate within a limited amount of screen time, and you go, well, I actually need to focus on this more, so I've got to actually lose something. So you're looking at what becomes absolutely necessary for the story and what is less necessary. And that was definitely a big change. Trying to find links as to why Evelyn would court the attentions of a boy, so young, and what she needed in the moment from him, and trying to find a way to express that on the screen in a visual world was another sort of challenge. So that ended up becoming the roller skating in the rain scene, which is a shared fantasy between Finn and Evelyn. And in that moment, it was about her need to live in the moment and just to be playful and be a child again, because she's facing her own mortality. So she just wants a break from this heavy load that she is carrying. And so that sort of came about because I found out that Melissa was a national roller skating champion in her younger years. And so I wrote in her roller skating, and that scene became about them connecting as two ageless, sexless beings in this shared fantasy. And that never really existed in the original draft. I kept wanting to write more of Shelley in because I really enjoyed her character.
I was going to say, I really loved Shelley. Just like some of the lines were hilarious. The spider babies and that type of stuff cracked me up.
I know. And Sophie Lowe is I have one of these relationships on screen with Sophie Lowe where I just want to watch more and more and more and more of her. I'm assuming it's not just me, but I do love to watch her on the screen. She could sit there and do nothing and I'd be entranced. So I was trying to find ways to keep deepening or more screen time for her character. And in the end, I could only get so far, and there was quite a bit of pressure to reduce her character as well in the development process from other financiers, and advice like, well, she's not a necessary character to the story, so you should, quite a few people said you should just take her out. So I fought against having to lose her entirely, and I'm glad I didn't. She had a stronger role in the original drafts. But aesthetically, the script and the film from the beginning has stayed true to that written vision. Obviously, there's a lot more I would have liked to have done had I had more time on set. A lot more shots I would have liked to have got, which could have demonstrated more of those visceral moments in more detail.
I was reading before that a lot of the inspiration for your film came from European movies like Pan's Labyrinth and Amélie.
Yes.
The films of Michel Gondry and Almodovar. In terms of making a film with lofty inspirations, how do you tackle that on a small Australian feature film budget?
First of all, I think I would not want to not encourage people to aim high, because, you aim high, you're going to land somewhere. And if you don't aim high enough, well, chances are you're always not going to land as high as you would like if you're idealistic and ambitious. So I think setting the bar high is not something, I don't think you should worry about regardless of what you're attacking. I think when you come to the actual attacking or the how-to process, then you go, okay, these are the resources I have available to me. What can I do within this space? How can I control the design of my frame, or, the design of the set? How can I be ingenious and how can I be clever about that? So the short answer is no. Of course, on a low budget feature, you're never going to have the same resources as those filmmakers that I referenced have. And therefore, you can never control the design of your frames and what goes on in your frames to the same degree. But I think by limiting the worlds in which you're going to have that degree of control and choosing where am I going to get the most bang for my buck, in terms of if I just have one set, and I put my focus on controlling the design of one set, and it becomes like a hero piece in my film. And then how do I make the other worlds of my film contrast that or support that? And those hero pieces were the glass house and her shop. That's only 2 sets. The way I approached all the other worlds of the film is to choose locations that had a colour palette that would support those worlds, and then to actually, either strip out so you look like it's designed, but in not, you're just using reductionism. Yep. Or you are looking for pre-existing places that already have a design element. So you're going, I have to put all my money here, and I don't have money for that. So I have to be specific in understanding the other sets, locations that I choose have to come with some design element that I can either work with by reducing, or I can dress in fairly basic things to give it a look that will support these other worlds or work in contrast too. So it feels like we're still all in the same film.
The film was all shot on location in Mount Tamborine. In terms of scouting for spots that really fit into your vision, was that a very long process?
Well, I always knew essentially, okay, to support this world of insects and this look of the film, that I wanted to be lush, I wanted it to be tropical, I wanted it to, have this gold green dominant colour palette in terms of Finn's forest world and his fantasy worlds. The obvious choice is to go, where are our tropical rainforests in where the film was shot in Brisbane, and there's really only Mount Nebo or Mount Tamborine. So Mount Tamborine was a very easy go-to place, and I had those images from Mount Tamborine in my pitch books very early on. We did actually scout around to see if there was any other places that were closer in terms of distance to Brisbane, because, you're trying to get around having to accommodate crew in terms of low budget. And so there's those sort of practicalities. But at the end of the day, I needed a tropical world and a tropical rainforest, and that's where we went. And everything except for the hospital was shot up in the township of Mount Tamborine, which is a very small town. So, for example, the back of the chemist where Corinne gives Finn those photographs, and Al's workplace, and the place where we shot Evelyn's burlesque routine that opens the film, that was all one location. That was all a community centre there. So it was like 3 locations within the film being shot at one location in reality. So doing those sorts of things obviously buys you more shooting time because you're not having to move. So a lot of it becomes about practical problem solving in terms of how to save as much shooting time as possible with limited locations.
You're already working on a new film, The Breathing Sea, which sounds pretty fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, so The Breathing Sea was written in collaboration with another writer called Heather Phillips. It tracks one woman's lifetime journey. She's a German Jew escaping Nazi Germany, and she comes to Australia and falls in love with a station hand, and she comes with her sister, and they move to a remote coastal town, and just when their relationship is blooming, her husband gets called up for war and he leaves, and she's alone in this isolated coastal town. And she reaches out and befriends a young man whose sexuality we discover is quite fluid, but she finds a soulmate within him, and she's already pregnant with her husband's child. But she loses that child, and it's her soulmate who's there to support her through that. She can't tell her husband that she's lost the child because she thinks that that's the one thing that will keep him alive while he's at war. And so she grows closer and closer to this young man called Earl. And as their relationship builds, there's a moment where she seduces him and it doesn't go well. Then she discovers that he has other sexual preferences, and she goes off on a self-destructive path and sleeps with Allied troops who were located near her town at the time, and it's an African-American soldier that she sleeps with. So we don't know whose child she's carrying. So she's lost one child to her husband, and now she's carrying either Earl's child or this African-American's child, but we don't know. Then she's forced to give up the child by her sister. And that's the story from the past when this couple is young, and the present day story when her husband returns from war. They're now in their 70s, and obviously there's been this huge rift and secret that she's had to carry all her life, and he's always wanted children, and he can't understand why she can't have any more because she had a medical condition at the time, but she can't tell him what has happened. And he wants to adopt, and she refuses to adopt because of her guilt about already having to give up one child. So her soulmate dies when they're in their 70s, and she ends up having a stroke and ends up in hospital. And when that happens, the son comes looking for her but doesn't find her, finds Jack, the old man now in his 70s. And so there's this unraveling of what's gone on in the past that happens between the two men. So Jack has his own memories back to the rift that started the beginning of the end of their relationship.
Would this have the same sort of aesthetic as The Butterfly Tree?
I mean, I think the interesting thing for me with filmmaking is about trying to find ways to visually show what is the visceral experience that is happening in this moment. So what do I want my audience to feel in this moment on a very tactile level? And then how do I do that visually? So I think you can pull surrealism into more of a realistic setting by the choices and your shot choices and textures and things. And I've just stepped out of having my writer's hat on. I'm starting to think of how I'm going to still use a similar approach in terms of what is the visceral experience and how can I make an audience feel this without just simply relying on standard coverage.
Sure.
So I think in those terms, yes, my approach is similar to The Butterfly Tree, but these worlds it's not your classic magical realism aesthetic that actually has quite a defined colour palette when you look at magical realism.
I can't wait to see that one. On the podcast, we like to recommend one film every week to our listeners, and we like to ask our guests for their suggestions as well. So if you could recommend one film, what would it be?
I do, and it's because I enjoy her aesthetic so much, and I think she does experiment with what I'm talking about, which is what is a visceral experience, what is the tactile experience that's happening in the moment, and that's Andrea Arnold and American Honey.
Ooh, okay.
So that would be what I think is a film that I've seen in the last year or so that speaks to trying to push further to give the audience some kind of tactile experience that happens as well as an emotional experience.
Yeah, American Honey is a pretty amazing movie. As you said, like sort of visceral experience for a film.
It can be called, I mean, people would also call it poetic. You have to go, well, what is poetry on screen? And I think it's something getting closer to a tactile experience. And how do you do that?
Yeah.
I've been a huge fan of hers since Fish Tank. So she has someone who I think leans into their spirit, like embraces their instinct in the moment. And I think that's really exciting. I know that she is a filmmaker that could pretty much make whatever she chose to make and people would finance her. So she's in a very privileged position, having this reputation as being a bold, authentic, original, visionary filmmaker who people want to support.
Yeah, she's definitely a very interesting modern filmmaker.
Yeah, I think she's a great role model.
Priscilla, thank you for joining us on the SWITCHCast.
Thanks, Jake.
Make sure you catch The Butterfly Tree from today. It's opening in cinemas across the country, so to find a screening near you, head to facebook.com/butterflytreefilm and check out the upcoming events.